I'm 33 and mostly prefer silence the way other people prefer applause. I'm a freelance designer, which is a fancy way of saying my desk is an island and my lifeboat at the same time. 10 years ago, I left a salary that paid for fluorescent lights and stale birthday cakes in the break room and decided to make pictures for people instead. My family called it taking a break, like I needed a nap from adulthood. My uncle called it performance art. And whenever he said it, my dad laughed the laugh he saves for one-liners that explain the world without changing anything. I could tell they thought this was a phase, a haircut I'd regret. The day I turned in my notice, my mom sat me down and asked me to think about healthcare, which is a fair question, and then she slid into the other question she keeps in a drawer labeled disappointment. Where did we go wrong? Why can't you be more realistic? Who quits a steady job to chase mood boards? I told her I had clients lined up. I did not. I had 3 email inquiries and a website with fonts I wasn't sure I could afford. She hugged me anyway, and in the hug I could feel her writing my future in pencil. My dad said, "Well, you'll learn." Which is what he says to people who ignore advice and hit the same wall again. The first year felt like living underwater. Every invoice that got ignored stretched the days longer. I rented a studio apartment so small I could boil pasta and answer emails without standing up, which sounds convenient until you smell onions while you proofread a contract. I designed logos for dog walkers and book club newsletters and a local bagel place that only paid in gift cards. When I told my uncle about that one, he said, "At least you're carb secure." And everyone laughed again. I started avoiding the group chat. Laughter is different when you are the surface it skips across. I kept notes of every job in a spreadsheet. The early rows were bleak, $50 here, $80 there. One client who mailed me a check with a smiley face in the memo line like we were friends, then blocked me when I asked about the remaining balance. I taught myself new software at night with tutorials narrated by men whose voices sounded like they had never yawned. I ignored group chats. I told myself that isolation was focus. Motivation posters are more credible when you can't afford a real frame. The thing about being introverted is that silence becomes your language. I learned how to talk quietly in emails, smooth and clipped, so clients would think I was a company instead of a person sweating over a borrowed laptop with a fan that whined like a violin. I refined my files like I was polishing stones with my thumbs. It sounds romantic. It was not. It was me, hunched like a question mark, trying to make colors behave. When my dad's friend offered me a short-term gig reformatting PowerPoints for his real estate group, my parents celebrated like I had come to my senses. "See?" my dad said. "You can make a living doing practical design." I did the job. It paid on time. My uncle shook my hand with 2 fingers. "Work for people who pay you," he said. "Art is a hobby." I smiled and deposited the check and went home to a fridge that made a sound like it was thinking hard about cold. In the quiet, I gave myself 30 minutes to be angry, and then I opened a new file and kept going. In those long nights, I thought in 2 voices, the one that belonged to my family and the one I was trying to grow. The family voice said, "You're unrealistic." My voice said, "You're early." The family voice said, "No one is waiting for your work." My voice said, "They don't know it yet." Sometimes I couldn't tell which voice was taller. I kept designing. I kept not saying much. I practiced being a person who believed me. If you've never had to do that, I recommend it, and I don't. That first year was a joke with my name on it. I just refused to laugh. On good days, I walked to the library to use their Wi-Fi because my apartment's router came from a thrift store and behaved like it had trauma. I sat between the biographies and the computers with privacy screens and pretended I was a person with a routine, which I guess I was. I watched people come in wearing lanyards and leave with tote bags, like proof of employment was a garment you could put on. I sketched interfaces on the backs of receipts. I learned which coffee shops let you sit for 4 hours on a single tea and which ones would ask if you were still working on that. I became a connoisseur of outlets. An old coworker messaged me around then. "Miss you at the office. We got a new espresso machine." I typed and deleted 10 replies before sending. "Good for you." He sent a selfie with the machine like a newborn again. People in stable jobs love appliances. It's how they measure progress. I had a kettle with an on-off switch that stuck. I hit it 4 times every morning like I was bargaining with electricity. When it worked, I told myself it was because I was persistent. Sometimes at night I reread my resignation email like it was a cliff I had jumped from. The subject line was polite. My manager had replied, "Best of luck. Keep in touch," with the faint exclamation points of someone already forgetting my chair. Once, for fun, my fun looks different, I calculated how many hours of my life I had exchanged for meetings about meetings. The answer made my stomach feel like a fax had just come through. If I failed at freelancing, at least my failure would be specific. It would be mine. My parents tried. They really did. They brought leftovers, hugged me in doorways, offered me coupons for printer paper as if paper were the missing ingredient in ambition. But every kindness was threaded to a doubt. "We're just worried you're isolating," my mom would say, glancing at my calendar taped to the wall, which was mostly empty squares. "You could come to church more." I told her silence was also a kind of church. She did not like that. On the worst day that year, the electric company shut off my power for 4 hours because I had paid the bill 2 days late, and the system did not care that I am a person. I took my laptop to the hallway, stole the building's weak signal, and finished an icon set by the light of the exit sign. When the power blinked back, I laughed, then cried, then laughed again because both felt ridiculous. I promised myself that if I ever made it, I would remember the green glow of that word, exit, and how I didn't take it even when it hummed. I keep thinking about introversion because people use it like a diagnosis. For me, it's a room inside my head where I can hear the gears. In that room, I designed things I knew no one would see for months. In that room, I started a list of rules: deliver early if you can, never send a file you haven't slept on, write a thank you email even when the client doesn't deserve one. The list made me feel like I was apprenticing with the future version of me who already trusted me. I wanted to become someone who wouldn't flinch when I introduced myself. Years 2 and 3 were a series of small humiliations delivered by email. People love to tell creative workers that they don't have budget, while attaching a 7-page brief and a deadline that would make a paramedic sweat. I answered professionally, which is a word that covers a lot of shaking. I learned to say, "I understand," when I did not. I learned to use template replies that made me sound like someone who could afford to say no, even when I couldn't. I made a portfolio on 3 different platforms because everyone had a different opinion about where clients lived. I polished case studies that were honestly more like case sketches and posted them with captions that lied a little for my survival. I took a typography class online and spent 15 hours redrawing the same lowercase g until my wrist hurt in a clean, reliable way, pain that felt like proof. I started wearing the same hoodie because a uniform saves decision-making, and decisions were a currency I needed to hoard. Family life narrowed into something with guardrails. I stopped telling them anything real. When they asked, "How's work?" I said, "Busy," and changed the subject to weather or traffic like I was auditioning for small talk. My uncle specialized in the kind of advice that is an insult to wearing cologne. "You know, if you got a job at an agency for a few years, then maybe you could freelance later. Build a network instead of a fantasy." My mom tried to lay pillows under his comments. "He means well," she'd say, kneading the air with her hands like she could soften it. I had panic attacks that I called bad nights, because naming them anything else made them too big. My chest tightened like a fist, my hands went cold, and the room got that weird wobbly edge like an unfinished render. I made tea and stared at invoices and scrolled forums where other freelancers promised me that it took time. One stranger's comment became a mantra. "Consistency is a talent." I taped it above my desk and pretended it was advice from someone who knew my name. There were small wins. A boutique coffee brand paid me fairly and sent extra beans. A nonprofit sent me a thank you email that made me cry because it sounded like a hug. A photographer asked me to redo her visual identity and then referred me to her sister, who owned a ceramic studio and needed packaging. Breadcrumbs. Meanwhile, my cousin Dan bought a house with an actual backyard and took a photo of his grill like it was a newborn. At dinner, my dad said, "Dan is thinking of starting a side business selling his sauce. Maybe you could help with labels, for the family." My uncle added, "It'll be good exposure." I said, "I'm not cold." And no one laughed. I learned pricing the way you learn to swim when you are thrown in. Too low and people assumed I was unqualified. Too high and they sent me ghost emojis. I created tiers and packages like a restaurant menu: appetizer, logo, entree, brand system, dessert, social templates. I revised contracts so payment wasn't an abstract future event. I charged a deposit before opening a file. I built a timetable, then doubled it, because people treat creative deadlines like suggestions written in fog. I put my phone in a drawer when I worked because I am not stronger than dopamine, I am just better at hiding from it. I failed often. A tech client loved my first concepts and then replaced me a week later because the CEO's nephew does designs. A local restaurant launched my menu layouts with a different font because the owner's girlfriend said mine was too serious. I refused to use the word perfect about anything. I tracked hours and learned that I could perform at a high level for 5 hours a day, not 8, not 10, no matter what hustle culture says. The rest of the time I handled admin and tried not to spiral. At Thanksgiving, Uncle Performance Art asked across the stuffing, "So, when are you coming back to the real world?" I said, "I never left." He said, "I'm serious. You're 30 now. This is when it calcifies, mistakes I mean." My dad didn't correct him. My mom squeezed my wrist under the table, a secret apology that didn't change anything. I imagined telling them that every day I held 100 tiny decisions in my mouth like sharp seeds and swallowed them so I could keep going. Instead I said, "Pass the gravy." There were also the scams dressed as opportunities. A man with a luxury watch in his profile photo offered me exposure worth more than any fee. He wanted a complete brand system for his stealth startup, which, near as I could tell, sold nothing at stealth speed. When I asked for a deposit, he replied, "Whoa, red flag." I said, "Agreed," and archived the thread. Another woman asked for a logo that looked exactly like Apple but different, which is its own genre of request. I made a folder called Nope, and it filled up like a rain barrel. A therapist would have helped then, but therapy costs what my rent used to, so I talked to a notebook instead. I wrote down the names of everyone who believed in me and everyone who didn't. The first list was short, the second was a family tree. Under the first list I wrote my name twice so it would look longer. If that sounds sad, it was, until it was funny. There is something stabilizing about being your own audience before anyone else shows up. There were days I wanted to go back, I won't lie. A steady paycheck is a lullaby you can hum through any storm. I imagined my old cubicle, the stapler, the ergonomic mouse, the fake plant that caught dust like it had a job. I imagined my manager asking me to take another pass at a banner, and me saying, "Absolutely," and then leaving at 5 to go to a gym where the treadmills watch TV, and it almost sounded like relief. Then I remembered the feeling I had in meetings when my idea slid under someone else's name like a coat under a chair. Relief is not the same as respect. If I'm making this sound noble, I'm not trying to. It was humiliating a lot. I sent cold emails with subject lines that tried to be charming and instead sounded like I'd swallowed a thesaurus. I received a response that said, "Unsubscribe," even though a person cannot be unsubscribed from. I had a week where 3 clients asked for extensions while telling me to hurry. I learned that most people are not malicious, they're crowded. So I built my systems to survive the crowding. By the end of year 3, my spreadsheet had more green than red. The numbers were not pretty, but they were mine, and that counted for more than I expected. In a rare moment of optimism, I bought a real desk chair second-hand. It had a scratch down the back like a scar that matched me. I sat in it and told myself, consistency is a talent, and I have been practicing. If you asked my family, the turning point happened overnight. To them, I went from designing bagel cards to international projects, like a character in a montage. Here's the less cinematic version. A London-based art director liked a case study I wrote about a failed project. That's it. I posted the autopsy because I didn't want to be another portfolio where everything magically went right. I titled it, "What I'd Do Differently If I Had to Do It Again." Unfortunately, I did. She sent me a calm email with sentences that didn't perform. She was building a team for a client and asked if I had capacity. I said yes, like I was ordering coffee, and then I put my phone face down and stared at the ceiling for a polite amount of panic. The client was a Scandinavian furniture company rethinking their online experience. Not a household name, but big enough that their emails had disclaimers in 2 languages. They were the first people who treated my time like a resource instead of a bottomless well. The brief was precise. The budget was real. They paid the deposit within hours of receiving the invoice, and I stared at my bank app like someone had given me a horse. I didn't tell my family because I wanted to keep one good thing safe and warm until it was real enough to survive commentary. For 6 months, I designed interfaces that moved like courteous strangers, smooth, coherent, polite. The company had a librarian mood, quietly obsessed with where everything belongs. It felt like someone had put me in the right category. I set my schedule like a monastery bell. I bought a second monitor, which, if you know, you know. When we launched, the art director wrote me a note that I printed and taped above my desk. "You kept the edges soft, and the thinking sharp." It was the first time a compliment felt like a mirror instead of a spotlight. That project did what portfolios are supposed to do. Other inquiries arrived, this time with fewer red flags. An outdoor gear brand in Canada. A fintech app in Berlin that actually understood accessibility. A museum in the Midwest with a donor who needed slides that didn't induce migraines. I said yes to most of them and built a pipeline that finally looked like a pipeline instead of a leaky hose. I raised my rates and no one screamed. I learned to hire a developer for the parts that would take me 3 days and take him 3 hours. I started measuring not just money but energy, which is a budget no one teaches you to track. Around the same time, my landlord decided my building was ready for improvements. Which is landlord for? We're raising the rent. I ran numbers that were suddenly not depressing and realized I could buy. Me. Buying. I looked at listings like they were fiction and then met a broker who used the phrase, starter home, without pity. I found a place, not big, not glamorous, but with windows that offered the kind of light you can earn. The kitchen didn't hiss at me. The first morning there, I made coffee and watched the sun move across the floor and felt like I had tiptoed into a museum after hours. I told my parents after the papers were signed. We met for dinner at a place with cloth napkins because I was feeling ceremonial. My mom teared up like the world had resumed normal programming. My dad asked, "How did you manage this?" in a tone I recognized from when he talks to car mechanics, suspicious respect. I said, "Work," and let the word sit there steaming. My uncle arrived late, sat down, and said, "So, the freelancing thing worked out once you started doing it properly?" I asked what properly meant. He said, "You know, getting serious." I said, "I've been serious the whole time." He looked confused, like the punchline had been changed without notice. I posted one photo of my office corner, desk plants, a print I bought from a young illustrator who reminded me of me. The comments were kind. Old classmates surfaced with normal congratulations. My cousin Dan messaged me a thumbs up, then a question mark, then, "Hey man, got time for a small favor? Need a label for my sauce by Friday." There it was, quick as weeds. I said I was booked and sent my rate sheet. He wrote back, "LOL dude, family discount?" and a shrug. It was like watching a knee-jerk in a reflex test. He didn't mean harm, he meant habit. The next months were steady. Money wasn't a monster in the room anymore. I took a day off and stared at a lake. I bought a chair that didn't hurt me. I paid quarterly taxes and didn't flinch. I stopped narrating my choices to imaginary critics. The silence got friendlier. When my mom called, her voice carried this new helium, like she had always believed, and now the universe rewarded her optimism. She asked when she could see the house. "Soon," I said. I was still choosing what I wanted to put on the walls, and I wanted to hear the house's opinion first. Success has a smell I can't describe, but my family caught it like bloodhounds. The same people who called my work playing on the computer started telling their friends that I was in design, like it was a country club. My mom sent me screenshots of her group chat where she had posted my office photo with heart emojis and a caption that read, "He always had an eye." I read it twice to make sure I understood. The past had been edited and released as a director's cut in which supportive parents nod respectfully at montage me. The requests arrived with a new tone. My dad called to say my Aunt Teresa's roof needed replacing, and wasn't it wonderful that we could finally help the family? I said, "What's we?" He said, "You know, we as in us." I said, "You mean me?" There was a pause long enough for both of us to hear the echo. "Well, you're doing well now," he said. "We couldn't help you those first years because you needed to learn, but now we can come together." It would have been funny if it wasn't my face. My uncle, whose hobby is advice, sent me a spreadsheet labeled Investment Opportunities, with tabs for Family Business, Real Estate, and Crypto Serious. The Family Business tab was a plan for Cousin Dan's sauce label and a storefront where my branding would bring in foot traffic like a magnet. "We can be partners," He wrote. You don't need to put up cash, just donate your time and skills. Sweat equity. It'll be good marketing for you. I replied with my rates like a stubborn fax machine and watched the typing bubbles arrive with indignation. My mom took the softer path. She came over with a pie and walked slowly through my house like she was taking a guided tour of her own patience. I always knew you'd find your path, she said, running a finger over the mantel like she could bless it. We just had to be tough on you because we love you. I made tea I didn't want and sat at the table that had cost me a month of design work and a backache. I said, Do you remember telling me to go back to my real job? She fluttered. We just wanted you safe. I said, I didn't feel safe. She looked at the pie as if it might answer for her. The escalation was quick. Dad asked me to co-sign a loan for my parents' kitchen remodel. The bank will see we're a strong family unit. My uncle asked if I could mentor his friend's kid who dabbles in Photoshop, which turned out to mean doing his portfolio for him. Cousin Dan texted extravagantly. Yo, we're launching in stores. Need packaging like yesterday. It'll be so good for your exposure. I considered mailing him a check marked exposure and nothing else. Instead, I sent a polite note that I had saved as a template for exactly this purpose. I wondered when I had become a person who saved templates for family. Maybe I had. Not in the way they meant, but still. I had changed from asking for permission to giving myself assignments. From performing gratitude for crumbs to charging for bread. I had changed from a person who waited at the edge of rooms to one who arranged the furniture. It looked like arrogance to people who preferred me kneeling. To me, it felt like finally standing up straight and finding out my spine hadn't broken all those years. It had just been tired. The tipping point was a Sunday dinner. My dad said grace and then added, And thank you that our son is finally joining the family business of being responsible. Then he asked me, in the same breath, to help my sister with a down payment. Just to get her started, you know how hard it is out there. My sister's eyes were hopeful, not calculated. She's never mocked me. She works 2 jobs and still goes home to a roommate who steals her yogurt. I said carefully, I can gift a small amount if we draw up clear terms so no one feels entitled to more. My uncle made a sound like a car failing to start. Family doesn't need terms, he said. Then why does the bank ask for them? I asked. He rolled his eyes like I had told a joke in poor taste. I finished chewing. I'm happy to help where I can, I said, with boundaries. The table did that thing where everyone looks at their lap. Boundaries. My dad repeated, not looking at me, like I'd used profanity in front of a priest. The rest of the meal was loud forks and quiet rage. When I got home, I stood in my doorway and let my house tell me who I was, a person who had built something. The idea came plain as a calendar invite, if they wanted to hear about giving back. I could give them the thing they avoided for years, my actual story. I sent the invitation the next day. Subject: Career Masterclass, what it actually took. I wrote, Since everyone's asking about my journey and how we can help the family, I thought I'd host a session to walk through what the last 10 years looked like, the work, the costs, the decisions, and what I'm able and not able to do now. Sunday 3 p.m., my place. No recording. I CC'd my parents, my uncle, Aunt Teresa, Cousin Dan, and out of fairness, my sister. I hit send and felt the small, precise weight of a boundary click into place. The invitation sat in my sent folder looking both petty and professional, which, if I'm honest, is a Venn diagram I've been circling for years. Career Masterclass. I chuckled at myself and then, because old habits are hard to kill, I opened a new project in my deck software like I was prepping for a client. I built a cover slide that said, what it actually took, in a quiet font with generous margins. The design was a little indulgent, but so is telling the truth. I made an outline like a teacher nobody asked for. 1. The early years, 2015 to 2017. 2. The cost of saying no. 3. Systems talent. 4. The breaks that weren't breaks. 5. The budget of a human. 6. What I can and cannot do now. I added a preface called Assumptions, and the only bullet point read, We all remember the same past. Then I added a footnote, We don't. It was funny in a dry way that tasted a little like aspirin. I gathered artifacts. Screenshots of invoices with drizzle amounts, calendar pages with more white than ink, a photo of the exit sign from my old hallway because I had taken it that night, green and humbly brave. Bank statements with everything private redacted and the balance left in view like an ankle bone, the months that mirrored winter. A cropped email where a client wrote, "We don't have budget but lots of exposure." And my reply, "I'm covered in exposure, thanks." A picture of my first desk chair, the one with the scratch like a scar. I printed the therapist's mantra, "Consistency is a talent," like it was a pull quote from my own life. I slipped these into a folder marked handouts because it amused me to pretend I ran a class. I set my living room like a small studio, 4 chairs and a horseshoe, one extra by the window in case someone brought a wild card, the projector on a stack of design books I finally had a reason to display besides height. I laid out a tray with water and tea and a plate of plain cookies, the boring kind that say, "This is about the content." I turned off my phone and then turned it on again because I am still me, and I do not trust the quiet device. My sister texted ahead, "Do you want me early? I can set out cups." "Yes," I said, and when she arrived she hugged me without trying to rearrange me. "You really did it," she said, looking around with eyes that had never been on me like a bank statement. "You did it," I said back, because she has been running on fumes for years and calling it perfume. We have a pact of respect that doesn't need a ceremony. She handed me a reusable bag with tiny succulents. "For the window," she said. "Survivors." I placed them on the sill like witnesses. They trickled in on Sunday like the beginning of a polite storm. And Teresa first, apologizing for being early while being on time. My dad next, adjusting his shirt as if the event had a dress code he could pass with effort. My mom held a pie like a passport. My uncle entered with the entitled energy of a VIP without wristbands. Cousin Dan followed with the elasticity of a guy who believes in shortcuts on all maps. My living room shrank and grew at the same time. "I'm proud of you," my dad said, standing in the doorway like a foreman inspecting a job site. It sounded like he'd been practicing. "Me too," my mom said, brighter. "This is classy. It's a nice setup," my uncle added, which in his tongue is congratulations. "I brought a notepad." He smirked. "You never know." "Good," I said, smiling like a waiter who already knows what's out of stock. We sat. I clicked to the cover slide. The projector hummed, a sound I associated with hope and meetings. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I know you've all been asking about how we can work together or help the family. I thought the best way to answer is to show you what the last 10 years actually looked like, and where things are now." "Is there going to be a Q&A?" Dan asked, half joking but also not. "Yes," I said. "At the end. Let me get through the material first, so we're all on the same page." My mom laughed softly like I was adorable for saying material. I turned to the first slide, 2015 to 2017, the years where nothing loved me yet. I spoke plainly. Not as a wounded son, not as a triumphant entrepreneur. As a person who did a thing. When I quit, I had $2,800 in savings and the courage of a fool. I thought I had clients lined up. I didn't. I had 3 emails with a religious amount of optimism. I cut my expenses, I learned faster than my fear, and I made a lot of work not worth showing you. I showed them the spreadsheet with the months in dull gray and the cells that were red and then pink and then, eventually, less alarming. I explained how pricing yourself is a humiliation ritual you perform until it becomes a language, how deposits are not greed but guardrails, how the difference between art and commerce is often a calendar invite. I described the library Wi-Fi, the hallway signal, the kettle switch that stuck, and the way the exit sign was a word and a dare. I watched their faces the way I watch a client's when I'm present, for the flinch, for the wince, for the place where resistance lives. My dad's mouth tightened at the bank balances. My mom's eyes glossed at the screenshot of Carb Secure next to a bagel gift card. My uncle leaned forward at the section called Unpaid Invoices, a catalog of polite theft. He muttered, "People are terrible." Like he just discovered the ocean. "Here's the part you didn't see," I said, clicking to a slide titled Let Me Count the Hours. It showed a stacked bar chart with colors for design, admin, learning, and panic. The panic bar was thin but present. I refused to erase it. I could work at a high level for 5 hours a day. Not 10. I learned to guard those hours like a bodyguard. I learned to say no to people who treated my time like a free refill. "That's just maturity," my uncle said. "All jobs have that." "I agree," I said. "The difference is I was learning it alone while being told I was irresponsible." My mom shifted. We only said that because we were worried. I know, I said. That's why it hurt. I advanced to 2018 to 2020, the systems. I walked them through my contracts evolving from apologies into agreements, my email templates growing spines, the tiered packages named like a restaurant menu that made them smile. I showed them the Nope folder and watched Dan mouth the word like a discovery. I didn't show any clients confidential work. This wasn't about clout. It was about the bones. Then 2021 to 2023 Look. I told them about the London art director and the project with the librarian mood. I described the deposit that arrived in hours and how I stared at my bank app like it was a window onto a life I would be allowed to live. I played a clip of the interface prototype, the movement so smooth even my dad nodded like a man who respects a well-cut joint. This, I said, was not an overnight thing. It was a slow motion yes. I ended the first half with what success cost. Therapy I could finally afford. Nights I can't get back. Friendships that atrophied because I was a ghost with a deadline. A spine that learned to stand where it used to fold. I didn't cry, and nobody clapped. That was perfect. We took a break. People ate boring cookies. My mom wandered to the succulents and said, "These are cute." Like the plant choice explained me. My dad whispered, "Proud of you." Again, but this time it sounded like he meant, surprised but adjusting. My uncle hovered near the projector, hungry for the next section like a man who needs to know where he fits in this narrative. Dan scrolled on his phone because attention is a muscle he only trains at the gym. Aunt Teresa rinsed the teacups without asking, because she is a person who knows how to help. I took a breath alone in the hallway where the light made a rectangle on the floor and the dust looked like snow. I reminded myself what I was doing, not punishing, not grandstanding. Cataloging. Offering a clear inventory of the store. If they wanted to shop, fine, but the prices were marked. When we sat again, I clicked to the slide I knew would be the fulcrum, what I can and cannot do now. I watched the room become alert, like someone had just announced raffle prizes. I kept my voice even. I am financially stable. I'm not rich. I'm not a bank. I have a plan for my future and for emergencies. I am willing to help in specific ways, not open tabs. I won't co-sign loans. I won't be an investor in family businesses. I won't donate my professional time. If you want my professional services, you'll be a client, and we'll use the same contracts that protect both sides. My uncle grinned in that way that looks like a flinch. This is where the generosity comes in, right? This, I said, is where the generosity becomes honest. I flipped to the last slide, boundaries are how I give without disappearing. And then I opened the floor. If you've ever presented to a room where one person thinks they're the moderator, you know the look. My uncle took a deep breath the size of a podium. I have a question, he said, even though he already had a speech. Where in all of this is the part where we, your family, benefit from your success? Because families are mutual funds. We invested in you when times were lean. Now it's time to distribute. I took a sip of water because it buys you 4 seconds and a temperature. What investment are you referring to? I asked calmly. If you mean emotional support, we can examine the receipts together. If you mean rent or bills, that didn't happen. If you mean the roof over my head when I was a child, that was parenting and I'm grateful, and I'm also an adult now. He laughed like I'd made a clever but impractical point. We gave you tough love. Tough is accurate, I said. Love is the word I'm working with. Aunt Teresa cleared her throat. I don't have a question, she said, but I have a comment. I didn't know about the unpaid invoices. The library Wi-Fi. I'm sorry I didn't ask better questions back then. She glanced at my mom, a small act of rebellion wrapped in concern. My mom's eyes filled and emptied like the ocean doing something discreet. We were scared, she said. You were isolating. You wouldn't come to church. We thought you were disappearing into, I don't know, a screen. I was, I said. I disappeared into work because nothing felt safe outside it. That wasn't healthy. I can see that now. But it's how I made it through when the main soundtrack at family gatherings was that I was unrealistic. My dad spoke softly. I did say that, he admitted, which is a sentence I didn't expect to hear before the end credits of our relationship. I thought I was protecting you from embarrassment. It was embarrassing anyway, I said, and felt no heat in it. But it was my embarrassment, and it taught me the right things. Dan lifted his head like a student who hears an answer within the perimeter of his desire. So if I want to hire you for the sauce, I can be a client, right? With a contract and everything. Family discount? I smiled a dignified inch. You can be a client. My rate sheet is in your inbox. I don't do family discounts. I do clear scopes and deliverables. If you want affordable options, I can refer you to a junior designer who's great. Or you can buy templates. Templates? He said it like I'd offered him frozen pizza at a wedding. They can be very good, I said. And sometimes the right fit for a small budget. Right, he muttered, which is how some people say. No. He looked back at his phone as if maybe the sauce would design itself if he didn't look at the problem long enough. My uncle made a show of taking notes he would never reread. So no investments, he said, like a waiter confirming an allergy. But you'll help your sister with a down payment, right? I mean, the family should help the family. My sister opened her mouth and then closed it. I'm capable of saving, she said finally. It just takes time. If my brother gifts me something, it will be because he wants to, not because we cornered him. She looked at me, and I nodded. I'll gift you a set amount, I said, because I love you and I want your life to be less hard. We'll put it in writing so no one else decides it's precedent. I didn't look at anyone when I said no one, but my uncle ducked anyway as if a bird had just flown low. My dad shifted in his chair like he was making room for a new idea. What about Teresa's roof? He said. I mentioned that because it's immediate. I can't fund a roof, I said. I can help in other ways. I can help her call contractors and compare bids and find the low-interest financing that isn't a trap. I can put in a little money to close a gap if it's truly a gap, not a hole that the bank will throw her into later. That's the boundary. I will help structure and I will help plan and I will not be the plan. Aunt Teresa nodded with relief that surprised me. Honestly, she said, I'd rather have someone on the phone who doesn't get bamboozled. I'm good at not getting bamboozled, I said. It's an unfortunate skill I paid for with time. My uncle laughed short. Come on, you can't take it with you. That's not the point, I said, and felt a steadiness in my spine like a plumb line. The point is I won't participate in rewriting history where I was supported and now owe dividends. I was doubted. I was mocked, sometimes to my face. That's not something I need you to apologize for on a microphone. I just need us all to operate with the truth in the room. He opened his mouth to argue with the word mocked, and then he closed it, because the bagel card was hanging in the air between us like a bad ornament. My mom tried a different door. We love you, she said. We're just proud now. Isn't that good? It is good, I said and meant it. It would have been better then. But I can handle the timing. I clicked to a slide that wasn't on the outline. How Tio asked me for help was in the middle in small, kind type. Underneath, bullets. Email me with details, not vibes. Ask once, accept my answer? If I say no, that's the end of the thread. If I say yes, we'll write it down. If it's professional work, we're doing a contract. If it's money, it's a gift only, never a loan. I do not co-sign. If you want me at an event, invite me without attaching errands. I let them read. The room was very quiet in the way meetings become quiet when the last alternative is to be honest. Dan raised his hand halfway. What about exposure? He smirked, trying to pivot us back into sitcom. Covered, I said. Remember? He smiled, a little ashamed and a little relieved that I hadn't flattened him. My uncle pursed his lips into a shape that says ruined the fun. My dad watched me with an engineer's curiosity, measuring how the load shifted when the beam moved. We rapped in the least cinematic way possible. People stood awkwardly, said polite things, picked up plates and stacked them as if that could tidy the decade. My mom hugged me too long, and I let her, because the child in me, though not in charge, is still on staff. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, I said. Me neither until I did. My uncle shook my hand like he was closing a deal he hadn't liked. I still think family should be more fluid, he said. And I think water ruins foundations, I said gently. So I'd build drainage. His mouth twitched because he appreciates a metaphor, even when it fences him out. After they left, my sister stayed and loaded the dishwasher like a person rearranging a puzzle. That was brave, she said. It was administrative, I said and laughed. Same thing sometimes, she said, and handed me a plate with crumbs like a shoreline. When she left, I stood in the doorway again, the way I did the day I decided the master class mattered. The house exhaled, and I followed. I wrote a group email that night. Subject: follow-up plus notes. Body: thanks for coming. Attached is the slide with my boundaries in case you want to refer to it going forward. I'll be stepping back from family requests for a while to focus on work and health. If you need me for something specific that matches the guidelines, email. Otherwise, I trust you'll figure it out like I did. Love, me. I sent it. Then I did nothing dramatic. I took a shower. I watered the succulents. I slept. In the morning, there were replies. Aunt Teresa sent a heart and thank you in a font too large but perfectly earnest. My dad wrote, "Understood. Proud of you." My mom sent a paragraph where the subject line worked as a hug. Dan replied, "I'll think about templates." My uncle wrote, "This feels cold." And then, a minute later, "Let's talk about the investment sheet when you've cooled off." I archived both, which is the adult version of drawing a boundary around a sandbox. And then I did what my life runs on. I opened an empty file and started working. Cutting ties sounds like fireworks if you say it fast. In practice, it's more like turning down a dimmer. I didn't block anyone, or move to a mountain, or throw out the pie dish my mom left behind. I set rules on my phone, silenced a thread here, filtered an email there. I changed my ringtone for unknown numbers to silence, and my ringtone for my sister to a brass bell. I removed myself from a family group chat where the daily content is memes about coffee and occasional guilt. I sent a last message. Stepping off this thread, text me directly if you need me, see guidelines. And ghosted the conversation like a professional. What I eliminated mostly was access to my attention on demand. I learned that a boundary is not a concrete wall, it's a schedule. In the absence of sudden requests, the house sounded different. My office chair wasn't a witness stand anymore. I worked without arguing with imaginary juries. My email rested at 0 for a full hour, then 2, like a lake that decided not to ripple. Work kept being work. The Berlin FinTech referred me to a medical app with an actual ethics committee. I redesigned the order flow for a small bookshop in Kyoto that shipped internationally. We did Zoom calls at my dawn and their dusk, and our faces looked like we were in 2 separate poems. I hired a bookkeeper who sent me a spreadsheet that made me tear up because it had the feeling of adult supervision without the condescension. I raised my rates again, and this time nobody negotiated. They just nodded like we were talking about gravity. I started putting money in buckets that had names. Emergency. Taxes. Retirement. Fun. The last one was new and made me suspicious, so I put it in quotes, fun, until I could trust myself not to feel guilty. I bought a pair of shoes that didn't squeak and a pan that made eggs look like a commercial. I paid for therapy without doing math in my head during the intake form. I learned my posture in the chair could be an apology or a declaration. I chose declaration more often. Family contact declined like a fever breaking. My mom texted updates about neighbors' kids and church bake sales with less subtext, or maybe I noticed the subtext less because I wasn't carrying it. My dad called once to ask about an ergonomic chair for his workshop, and I sent links without commentary. Aunt Teresa and I became co-conspirators in the least dramatic rebellion, consumer education. We sat together with her contractor on speakerphone and asked about moisture barriers and warranty lengths until he realized this call would not end with a sigh and a credit card. "You're good at this," she said after, and I filed the compliment with the ones that feel like a mirror. My uncle tried 3 times. First with a joke. "Any seats left in your master class? I could teach a unit on hustle, winky face," which I ignored. Then with a provocation. "Hope you don't forget who changed your diapers, winky face," which I also ignored because the semicolon turned my spine to stone. Finally with a pitch. "Quick favor, can you look at this logo and just adjust it a bit? It's for the family biz," which I answered with my contract link like a vending machine. He sent one-word replies. "Seriously? Wow. Cold." And then stopped. I did not miss him. I missed the idea of an uncle who could have been, which is softer and therefore harder. Missing an idea is like missing weather. Dan sent a photo of his sauce on a shelf at a local shop. The label looked okay, a template dressed up with hustle. "Went with Canva," he wrote. "Not bad, right?" I typed, "Looks good, congrats," and meant it. He hadn't learned my craft, but he'd learned something else, the difference between asking and expecting. That felt like growth. My sister and I had coffee in my kitchen twice a week, a ritual we built like a tiny church. We talked about money the way people avoid money, sideways, with jokes, but we also said numbers out loud like we were desensitizing ourselves to an allergy. She signed a lease for a studio apartment where the window looked over a parking lot in a way that made the cars seem organized. She cried when I transferred the gift with the subject line "not a precedent" and a heart. She promised to pay it forward to her own future in a shape neither of us could see yet. I don't demand proof of that kind of promise. I just want it to be possible. Holidays changed. I went for dessert, not dinner. I brought my own tea because my mom buys the floral kind that tastes like perfume. Apologies. We did grace without disclaimers. My dad made a dad joke that actually landed, and we let it land. My uncle glared at me like I'd traded something precious for boredom. I didn't rise to it. Boredom is underrated. It's a sign your nervous system is being allowed to retire from a war it didn't enlist in. I kept my house like a garden. I replaced the noisy fan. I learned the sun's schedule on my walls in winter and summer. I framed the print from the Young Illustrator and hung it where I see it when I leave and again when I come home. I planted herbs in a window box and killed 2 of them by overwatering because sometimes love is pressure. I wrote a new list of rules and put it next to the old one: deliver honest work. Sleep on files. Say yes after an overnight. Say no in 1 sentence. Don't explain beyond the first no. Be kind even when you're withdrawing. The last one is the hardest. The last one is the revenge I choose. 2 months after the masterclass, I got an email from my old manager at the fluorescent job. Subject: quick project? He'd started a consultancy and needed a deck that didn't feel like punishment. He referenced my portfolio and wrote, "We always knew you had an eye." I looked at that sentence for a long time, old anger moving through me like weather I'd already outlived. I wrote back with my rates and timeline and a friendly tone. We did the work. He paid on time. At the end he wrote, "Pleasure. You're really doing it." I replied, "I am," and closed the thread. No sarcasm, no bitter emoji. Just the truth, doing its quiet job. I thought the masterclass would be the revenge. It wasn't. The revenge was what came after, the way their voices stopped taking up so much space in my head. The way I could sit in my office and hear the hum of the projector only when I turned it on. The way silence turned from a shield into a room with windows. The way success stopped being a weapon and became a tool I use with 2 hands, not to cut people off, but to build a life with clean edges. Last week, my mom texted a photo of a baby blanket she was knitting for a neighbor and wrote, "I'm learning a new stitch at my age. Proud of me?" I wrote, "Very." And I was. People can change stitches. The fabric changes. The past doesn't unravel, but it stretches where you pull. I walked to the library the next morning out of habit and nostalgia. I sat near the biographies and watched people with lanyards pass the computers with privacy screens. I logged into my email on my own laptop with my own Wi-Fi and looked up the fine for overdue books because I had one in my tote. The exit sign still glowed its good, green fairness. I looked at it and thought, I didn't take you. I stayed. Then I checked the time, paid my fine, and went home to work. Sometimes revenge is a spectacle. Mine is a seating chart: who gets a chair, who stands, who doesn't get invited. They can call it cold if it helps them feel warm. I call it weather. My job is to know my climate and dress accordingly. I'm 33. I like silence. I design things. The joke with my name on it isn't funny anymore, and I don't mind. The house is quiet in the way I used to dream about. If you stand still, you can hear the small sounds of a life that fits: keys in a dish, kettle clicking off without persuasion, a chair that doesn't apologize, the soft thud of a boundary doing what it's designed for, holding. True revenge didn't need a speech. It needed a door, gently closing, and the decision not to keep peeking through the window. I didn't slam anything. I just locked what's mine and put the key where I can reach it. And then I went back to work, which is to say, I went back to myself.